Hey, what's up? This is Chosen, and this video is going to be a full walkthrough and guide on how to properly gear and build a champion, because it's one of the most common questions I get when I'm streaming or in comment sections is, hey, I got this champion, how do I build them? How do I gear them? And I see these posts on Reddit all the time. Hey, how do I build this champion? I don't know what I'm doing. So wanted to get a video out there where I do a full dedicated video to the thought process behind building a champion properly. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so first of all, a resource I want you to know about that I will try to remember to link down in the video description is this spreadsheet I did where I rank all of the sets. So it can be a good resource in terms of reading through and having it at your disposal, so you have all of the sets and what they do ranked and their full effect in kind of a one little resource that's easy to read. So I will have that down in the video description, and I have a whole video talking about the thought process behind where I ranked these sets and all of that. So let's put that away and let's dive into this discussion about gearing a champion. And for the purposes of this video, I will be gearing my Bellower and kind of showing you the full thought process behind gearing Bellower and what goes into that, because Bellower is a very commonly built champion for early to mid game players, and also he is kind of a good one in terms of a discussion, being a good example, and he kind of checks all the boxes on things that I want to talk about. So let me pull up my Bellower and let's get into this. Alrighty, so the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what is this champion's role? There is typically 5 roles that a champion will fall into, and that is meter booster, support, buffer, debuffer, and damage dealer. Those 5 roles will cover about 99% of champions. So just to quickly kind of define them, a meter booster is someone like Arbiter, Apothecary, Lysandra, Haikatu, and somebody who has a speed and turn meter boost as kind of the main feature of their value. And those champions you want to be insanely fast. That's why you see all these Arbiters in the arena that are over 300 speed. That's why you see Apothecaries that are typically over 250 speed. You want your speed boosters and meter boosters to be the fastest people on your team to get those meters and get the maximum amount of value out of boosting your allies' meters to catch them up to them. The next one I mentioned is support. Now, support is kind of the category that this build for Bellower is going to fall into, in terms of a support is typically going to be a healer, a reviver, or a CC, you know, placing a bunch of stun and stuff like my Bellower here. I built him as a support. I've got a full guide on Bellower, but I've actually got him built as a support with fearsome presence built around the stun set. So he is more of a CC debuffing support. He kind of falls into 2 different categories here in both a support and a debuffer. So while we're on the subject of debuffer, we'll quickly touch on that role. This is somebody who's going to be doing defense break or debuffing your opponents in some sort of fashion. Typically pretty simple. Then the buffer role. So this is somebody who's going to be buffing defense, providing counterattack, boosting attack, boosting certain stats for your team. You typically want them at the back end of your rotation so that you're not wasting turns of your buffs. Then the buffer role is going to be somebody who places crucial buffs on your team, either in counterattack buffs or attack buff, defense, continuous heal, any sort of buffs for your team that you're going to be placing on the rest of your allies. And then the last role that I mentioned was damage dealer. So this is going to be somebody who typically goes at the back end of your rotation so that you have time to both debuff the opponents and buff your damage dealers, and then your damage dealer is going to come in the back of the rotation and smash out all of that DPS. So they're typically going to be a little bit slower and behind your meter boosters and your support and your debuffers and your buffers. That way you have time to get everything lined up, get everything into place, and then the damage dealers slam your opponents. But now that we have the roles clearly defined and explained in terms of meter booster, support, buffer, debuffer, and damage dealer, one of the first questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're building a champion is, does the champion need accuracy or not? That's a very important question to get answered right off the bat, because that really changes how we gear a champion. So in Bellower's case, we're going to look, does this champion place debuffs? Is a lot of their value tied into them landing debuffs on our opponents? In Bellower's case, that is an emphatic yes, because all of his abilities are placing debuffs. We've got block cooldown skills, decrease speed, decrease attack, decrease defense. So 4 different debuffs that we're trying to land on our opponents. So in terms of, does Bellower need accuracy, Emphatic yes. So we need to make sure that we get him in high accuracy. While we're on the subject of that, accuracy and resistance is kind of the balancing act in a game, and the answer of does this champion need resistance is going to be yes, a lot less often. Resistance tends to be a lot more niche than accuracy. Typically, you're going to need accuracy on champions about 10 times more often than you're going to need resistance. Resistance on champions is going to be more niche, more specialized. It's going to be for like higher up in the arena. You're going to want a lot of resistance on certain champions so that they can, you know, not get debuffed by your opponent. Once you get to the higher tiers of gold 4 and platinum, you're going to have to start worrying about resistance in the arena, or a strategy like if you're building a cross affinity tank in the spider dungeon, somebody to kind of soak up and absorb all of those spiderling attacks and then resist the poisons that they're trying to place. So resistance can also be good versus like faction wars bosses, because a lot of times they're placing fear and doing a bunch of suppression stuff. So you may need to build resistance teams in order to get past a hurdle of a faction wars boss or something. But my point is, it's a lot more niche, and needing accuracy is a lot more generalized, and you're going to need it a lot more often. But before I move on from the accuracy and resistance kind of discussion, there's a few things I want to talk about in terms of accuracy, because I don't think a lot of newer players understand the accuracy and resistance balancing act as well as they should. So a really common question is, how much accuracy do I need? I have no idea. Is 80 accuracy good enough? Is 350 too much? How do I possibly know how much accuracy I need on a champion? So typically my answer is between 10 and 14 per dungeon level. So for instance, level 20, you would take level 20 dungeon times 10 and times 14, and that will give you your range. So 20 times 10 is 200, 20 times 14 is 280. So you're going to want, if you're doing a level 20 dungeon and you have a debuffer that needs accuracy, you're going to want their accuracy somewhere between 200 and 280. So 200 would be kind of on the lower end, and 280 would be kind of on the higher end. Now, the reason it's not really optimal to go too much above that is you're really getting diminishing returns. A lot of people also don't know this. You cannot get to a 100% debuff rate. You just can't. Even if you get 500 accuracy and you go into a level 20 dungeon, there's still a chance you're going to miss those debuffs. And once you get up over about 280 or 300, it's really diminishing returns on those points of accuracy. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference in terms of your success rate. So that's why I say somewhere between 10 and 14 times the dungeon level, and that can also be used in faction wars. If you're on level 20 of a faction wars, the same metric can kind of apply. So anywhere between 200 and 280 on a level 20 faction wars. Now, this changes in the arena. I would say anything over 200 accuracy should be good enough, all the way up until like kind of the higher ranks of gold 4. When you start getting into platinum, that's where you're going to start needing 350, 400 accuracy. Down in like silver, anything over like 140 should be good enough, and in bronze, anything over like 120 should be good enough. Now, I haven't been in the lower tiers of the arena consistently for a while, so I could be a little bit off on that. I don't know that nearly as well as the dungeons, but I would say in the arena, if you're in bronze, anything in that 120 to 140 range should be okay. And then in silver, anything from like 140 to 170. And then in gold, anything from 200 to 300 should be pretty good until you get to the higher echelons. And then you're going to start needing to be over 300 and maybe even approaching 400 if you're going to want to be getting up anywhere close to plat. Another important thing to understand about accuracy is it's basically going to be needed for any sort of manipulation you're doing to the opponent. So another common question I get on stream is, do I need accuracy for turn meter reduction, stealing turn meter, stuff like that? Do I need accuracy for gear sets, like the stun set on my Bellower here? You see it says 18% chance to place a stun debuff. A lot of people are curious, do I need accuracy for these certain things? Basically anything that you're manipulating your opponent, you're gonna need accuracy for. So yes, in terms of manipulating turn meter or stealing buffs or removing buffs, anything like that, yes, you need accuracy. Now, there is an exception for gear sets like the stun set. You don't need accuracy for that. So this 18% chance to place a stun debuff, based off of the 4-piece set of the stun set does not need accuracy. I can have a 0 accuracy person wearing the stun set, and they will still have an 18% chance to place that stun. So I know I'm kind of talking a lot about accuracy and resistance, but it's a very important thing to understand in Raid is how properly it works. And I guess I should explain how landing a debuff works. So when you read a skill and it says 20% chance of placing a block cooldowns skills debuff for 1 turn, what does that mean? Is it 20% chance to place it no matter what my accuracy is? A lot of new players can be confused about this. So how this works is he hits an enemy, and I've actually got him booked. So we take the 20% chance plus the 5% chance plus the 5% chance, and that is 30%. So when he hits an enemy, it's going to be 30% chance to attempt to place a block cooldown skills debuff. Now, if that 30% procs and he attempts to place the debuff, now the game is going to roll my Bellower's accuracy against the enemy's resistance. So the bigger spread you can get between your accuracy and their resistance is the higher likelihood that debuff will actually land. So there's a difference between trying to place it, you can see here the 30% chance of placing it, and it actually landing. So there is a chance where if his accuracy is too low, he'll roll that 30% to try to place it, but if his accuracy is too low, it won't successfully land and it will do nothing. So you need to, roll both of those as a positive. You need to roll the 30% chance to place it, then you need to roll your accuracy versus their resistance to have a higher percent chance to actually land it. So that's very important to understand. And in terms of where can we get accuracy, typically the best route to go is banner. Banner can be a big source of accuracy. You can also get a big source of accuracy from chest plates, but this is typically considered a suboptimal route. You typically want a good main stat on your chest, so I would recommend getting accuracy from your banner and then substats, so like your weapon and your helm. And so you can see here this helm has a substat for accuracy, so I would go for substats on your gear and banner. And worth noting that banners, jewelry in general, typically can't have accuracy as a substat. The only exception is the amulet. You can see here the amulet has a really good accuracy substat here. Banners, even though they can get accuracy as a main stat, they cannot have accuracy as a substat. So if you choose to have an attack or defense or HP banner, you cannot get accuracy as a substat. So not going the route of an accuracy banner is actually a big sacrifice in terms of accuracy. You're gonna, in that case, you're definitely gonna want an amulet with 2 or 3 rolls of accuracy. And rings can never have accuracy in any capacity. Not the main stat, not the substat. Amulets cannot have it as a main stat, but they can as a substat. Banners can have accuracy as a main stat, but never as a substat. Sorry, that was a lot to chew on in terms of accuracy and resistance. I don't want to go over that quickly because it's extremely important to understand in terms of accuracy and resistance. So I apologize if that was a little bit long-winded. I just didn't want to be short about explaining that because it's a question that comes up a lot. So the next thing we want to ask ourselves after we figure out the whole accuracy resistance thing and does this champion need accuracy, which in our Bellower's case, it was true. We do need accuracy, and that's why you can see here the accuracy is up at around 238. And I explained kind of why it's that 238. I'm using him in level 20 dungeons, so I want to be somewhere between 200 and 280, and 238 slots right into that window. So the next question we kind of have to ask ourselves is, what's the speed? Is speed super important on them, and where do they go in our rotation? So remember, in terms of the order that you want your champions to be in your rotation, it's going to be turn meter boosters like Apothecary and Arbiter. You want them to be at the front of your rotation with insane amounts of speed. Then you're typically going to want your debuffers, your people that are debuffing the enemies. You want them to go next. Then you want your buffers, and then you want your damage dealers. So the order of your speeds is typically, not always, there's some niche strategies, so you got to kind of weigh your options, but it's typically going to be your meter boosters, then your debuffers, then your buffers, and then your damage dealers. So that's kind of the order that you're going to have to kind of fit your speeds in and kind of tune them, and they will go in the order. So if you have a champion that's 200 speed, they will go before a champion that has 180 speed. So you really got to play with your speeds and get your rotations worked out properly so that your team is performing on all cylinders and kind of going in the proper rotation. Then when you figure out the speed, you're going to want to go through all of the sets. Remember, I've got that sheet down in the video description. You're going to want to go through all the sets and ask yourself, are there any sets that are super optimal on this champion that I have available to me? So you're going to want to go through, look at that, and pick out, you know, your damage dealers are going to do really good with savage, crit damage, typically attack if that's their main stat. Not all damage dealers are attack main stats, so you're going to want to make note of their main stat. When you look at that, you're going to want to go through the champion's skills, and you can see damage based on, damage based on, damage based on, and you're going to want to take note of that in terms of, are you prioritizing attack, defense, HP, and all of that. But you're not always going to prioritize that stat, because like for my Bellower, his damage is based on attack, but I'm building him as a support, so I'm not worried about his damage. Any damage I get out of him is just a bonus. I'm using him as a debuffer and a stun set CC'er for dungeon and faction war waves. I'm not building him as damage, even though he's based on attack. That doesn't pigeonhole you and mean that you have to prioritize that stat. It's just if they're a damage dealer, you're going to want to prioritize that stat. But that is probably a separate video, a separate like 15 to 20 minute discussion I'm going to want to do at some point in terms of going through every set in the game and talking about what champions are best in that set. I don't want this video to be an hour and a half long and make it too long-winded, but I will probably go over all of those sets and talk about which champions are going to be best in them and what situations they should be used. But that resource is there for you down in the description if you want to be able to go over all of that. So the next thing I want to talk about is glove and amulet synergy. This is typically very important to take note of. So your gloves are the only gear piece that you can get a main stat of crit rate or crit damage. So you're going to want to synergize your gloves and your amulet, because amulets are the same way. It's the only piece of jewelry that can get crit damage as a main stat. So if your gloves are based on damage dealing, aka crit rate or crit damage, typically your amulet is going to want to synergize with those and be crit damage. One exception I can think of off the top of my head is a bomb placer. So someone like a War Mother or a Lord Shazar, something like that, their damage on their bombs is not going to scale with crit damage. So typically in that situation, you'll go attack percent gloves and attack main stat amulet to get those bombs to hit as hard as possible. That's one exception I can think of, but in 90-something% of situations, you're going to want to synergize your glove and your amulet. If your glove, in this case, is based on sustain, your amulet is going to be based on sustain as well. Another important discussion to have is amulet and ring. Which main stat do you want on amulet and ring? So on my Bellower, you can see I've got defense and defense on both my ring and amulet. So why did I choose that? And why did I go defense instead of HP? How did I make that decision? So on someone like Bellower, you can see here the base defense is 914. So if their base defense is under 1,000, typically, not always, typically if you're building them as a support, you're gonna want to get flat stat defense, because they don't scale well with the defense percentages, and you want to get defense over 2,000. Typically, if you're in the end game, you don't want to be below 2,000 defense. So since it's hard for me to scale Bellower's defense percent rolls because his base defense is so low, I take the opportunity to get a big flat stat bonus on the ring and the amulet. It's important to kind of match those up. Now, if he were a damage dealer like Sir Nicholas or something, I would probably want a ring that is based off of HP, because Sir Nicholas's damage is based off of HP, and he's going to scale both his toughness and his damage based on HP. So that's why you can see here the ring is going to be a main stat of HP. So that's kind of how you can have that discussion with yourself and ask yourself, which base stat is best for my ring and my amulet. In Bellower's case, his base defense is very low. Typically, if it's under 1,000, they have low base defense, and if that's the case, it's a good idea to scoop up a big defense roll on your ring. Even for damage dealers, you want to be careful. You don't want them to be too squishy, unless it's like an arena nuke team or something, but you do want them to have a decent amount of toughness. You don't want them to just fall over every turn. So a ring can be a good spot to get a defense roll, even for a damage dealer, because typically your damage dealers are going to want crit damage on the amulet. So defense rings are very high value and very sought after. Another thing you want to take note of is crit rate. Do they need crit rate? If they're a damage dealer, you're going to want them with 100% crit rate. When you click on total stats, you're going to want this crit rate to be 100. You want them critting as often as possible, and remember when you're building them to get them to 95% crit rate, because typically you are going to go into the masteries and get this 5% crit rate if they are a damage dealer. But that's kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on, and this got a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I wanted to make sure I kind of dive in and have a discussion about how to build a champion. And if you have any questions, drop it down in the comments. I'll do my best to get to what I can, or stop by when I'm streaming and feel free to ask me about how to gear a champion. I'm happy to help you if you have any questions that were not covered in this video, and I will try to do that video where I walk through each set and which champions it's best on and which situations it's most optimal to use. So yeah, I hope this helped you out, and as always, thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Peace.